She stood in the middle of his cabin and told him the ranch was worth nothing, and Ben Calloway did not argue, because he had heard that his whole life. What she did not know was that the man she had just insulted was the only reason her father's land had not been swallowed by debt 3 years ago. He turned away before she could see his jaw tighten. If you have ever been told that what you have is not enough, stay with this story, because what happened next changed both of them forever. Like this channel and stay until the end, you will not regret it. Benjamin Calloway had been called many things in his 35 years. Quiet, dependable, patient. A few less charitable souls in Millhaven had called him poor, and they were not wrong in any way that a banker would recognize. He owned a cabin with a patched roof and a front porch that tilted 12 degrees to the left. He had 4 horses, a border collie named Rooster, and a reputation that stretched 40 miles in every direction across Colorado territory. That reputation was not built on money. It was built on something harder to come by. Ben Calloway showed up. When Thomas Greer's roof collapsed under 3 feet of snow in January of 1886, Ben was there before dawn with lumber and rope and did not leave until the job was finished. When the Harmon widow could not get her cattle to water after the creek froze, Ben broke ice for 6 hours with his bare hands and a splitting maul and refused the $2 she tried to press into his palm afterward. When the Delacroix boy fell from his horse and broke his collarbone 2 miles from town, it was Ben who carried him all the way, never putting him down. People remembered those things. People also remembered that he had nothing to show for any of it. He was 35 years old with a left boot that let in cold water and a coffee tin on his shelf that held exactly $11.40, which was every cent he owned in the world that was not already committed to something or someone else. He did not think about this often. He thought about it that morning, though, when Walt Pruitt rode up to his fence at 7:30 and said the Foster girl had arrived. Ben was in the middle of reshoeing his gray mare, Clementine, and he did not look up. What Foster girl? Old Gerald Foster's daughter. Walt leaned on the fence post like he had nowhere to be. Came in on the evening stage last night. From Boston, they say. Traveled all this way to see what the old man left her. Ben set Clementine's hoof down and straightened slowly. Gerald Foster had died in March, a quiet man, decent. Not someone Ben had known well, but someone he had respected. The man had owned 40 acres to the east of town that nobody had touched in 3 years. The fence lines were down. The well needed work. The small barn was missing half its roof on the south side. Ben had ridden past that property many times and thought about what could be done with it if someone cared enough to try. She staying? Ben asked. Says she is. Walt looked like he found this amusing. Woman comes from Boston. Never seen a working ranch in her life. Says she's going to run that place. He shook his head. She's going to need help. Ben picked up his hammer and turned back to Clementine. Most people do, he said. He did not think about Adeline Foster again for 3 days. Then she knocked on his door. He heard the knock at 6 in the morning, which was not unusual. People in Millhaven came to him at odd hours, and he had learned long ago not to resent it. What was unusual was who was standing on his tilting porch when he opened the door. She was wearing a blue dress that was entirely wrong for Colorado in April city fabric. Too light, not warm enough by half, and she was holding her skirts out of the mud in a way that suggested the mud was personally offensive to her. She was also undeniably the most composed woman he had ever seen at 6 in the morning. Most people who came to him this early were in some state of distress. She looked like she was arriving for a business appointment. Mr. Calloway. Her voice was clear and precise, every syllable exactly where she intended it. I was told you know this territory better than anyone. I need someone to assess my father's property and tell me honestly what it would take to make it functional. Ben looked at her for a moment. Good morning, he said. Something shifted in her expression just slightly. The smallest possible adjustment, and he understood that she had not led with a greeting because the thought had not occurred to her. Not rudeness exactly. More like a woman who had spent so long being efficient that courtesy had become a thing she remembered after the fact. Good morning, she said, and her chin came up a fraction. Would you be willing to help? Coffee first, Ben said, and stepped back from the door. She hesitated on the threshold for just a moment. Then she came inside. She sat at his table, the same table where he ate every meal alone, and looked around his cabin with the particular kind of careful neutrality that people adopted when they were trying not to show what they actually thought. Ben had seen that look before. It did not bother him the way it once had. He poured 2 cups from the pot that had been on the stove since 5:30 and set one in front of her without asking how she took it. She wrapped both hands around it and did not drink. "My father left me 40 acres, she said. "The property assessment I commissioned from Denver puts the land value at $600. The structures are in disrepair. I have been told the fence lines need to be entirely replaced." She paused. "I have been also told that you helped maintain parts of that property after my father's health declined." Ben sat down across from her with his own cup. He looked at her over the rim of his cup. It was an honest question, asked without particular warmth, but also without suspicion, just a woman who genuinely wanted to understand the accounting of a favor she had not asked for. "Because Gerald asked me to keep an eye on it," Ben said. "And because nobody else was going to." She absorbed that. "He paid you?" "No," her eyes moved across his face. "Reading something there. Why would you do that without payment?" Ben set his cup down. "Miss Foster," he said, "there are things people do for each other out here that don't get paid for. Not because they aren't worth anything. Because some things are worth more than what you can put a number to." She looked at him steadily. "That is a very philosophical answer for 6 in the morning." He almost smiled. "Yes, ma'am, it is." She looked down at her coffee for the first time, and something about the set of her shoulders shifted, not much, but enough that he noticed it. "I want to make the ranch work," she said. And for the first time her voice held something other than efficiency. "My father built that place before I was born. He never talked about it very much. I think he was ashamed that he let it go to ruin." She stopped. "I don't want to sell it. I know that is probably what a sensible person would do." "Probably," Ben agreed. "But I am asking you anyway." She looked up. "Will you help me?" He thought about his $11.40. He thought about his patched roof, and his tilting porch, and his left boot that let in cold water. He thought about the 40 acres to the east, and everything that could be done with them. "I can give you 2 mornings a week," he said. "I have other work. But I can show you what the place needs and help you understand what's worth fixing first. I will pay you fairly. We can discuss that when we know what the job is," he said. "No point in agreeing to numbers before we know the problem." She looked like she was not accustomed to that kind of answer. Most people, he suspected, named their price immediately when she offered to pay. He was not most people. They rode out to the Foster property at 8 that morning. Ben on Clementine, and Adeline on a rented bay mare from the livery stable that was considerably too much horse for a woman who had not ridden in years. He knew she had not ridden in years from the way she sat, too rigid, fighting the animal instead of moving with it, hands too tight on the reins. He did not say anything about it. He rode a half-length behind her in case the mare decided to test her, and he watched the road ahead and let her find her own balance. She almost lost it twice in the first mile. The second time, the mare shied at a jackrabbit, and Adeline grabbed the saddle horn, which was not the elegant thing to do, but was the correct thing, and got the animal back under control herself. She did not look at him to see if he had noticed. He liked that. They reached the property in 20 minutes, and Ben dismounted first and tied Clementine to the gatepost, then turned to watch what Adeline would do with her mare. She managed the dismount without help. It was not graceful, but it was competent, and there was a difference. She stood and looked at the property, and Ben stood a few feet away and watched her face. He saw the exact moment she understood the actual state of things. It was not what the Denver assessment had described. It was worse. "The fence along the north line is completely gone," Ben said, walking the perimeter at a pace she could keep up with in her city boots. "Not just down gone. Someone pulled the posts for lumber a year or 2 back. South line is standing, but the wires rusted through in 4 places. The well is—" He stopped. "Come look at this." She came to stand beside him at the well and looked down into it. "There's collapse on the interior wall," he said. "Probably happened during the freeze last winter. You cannot use this water until that's shored up and the water tested. How long does that take? Week of work. If the collar holds. More if it doesn't. She wrote something in the small notebook she had produced from her coat pocket. He watched her write without expression. "The barn's the bigger concern," he said. "Come." They crossed to the barn, and he pushed the door open and let her see it in full, the caved section of roof on the south side. The rotten boards along the floor, the stall dividers that had warped and cracked. "It's possible to repair it," he said before she could speak. "But it needs to be prioritized before a structural wall goes. If you lose that east wall, the whole thing comes down." She was writing again. "Estimate?" she asked. "Labor or material, both?" He named a number. She stopped writing. "That's considerable," she said carefully. "Yes, ma'am, it is." She closed the notebook and looked at the barn wall, the real one. Not the assessment version from Denver, and for the first time since she had arrived on his porch at 6 in the morning. She did not look composed. She looked like a woman trying very hard to hold something together inside herself that was threatening to come apart. Ben looked away. He walked to the barn door and looked out at the property and gave her whatever privacy he could from 8 feet away. After a long moment, he heard her footsteps. She came to stand beside him. "My father left me this," she said quietly. "A place I never visited. A problem I do not know how to solve, and an assessment from Denver that was apparently written by someone who had not actually been here." There was something in her voice that might, in a different woman, have been tears, but in Adeline Foster it came out as something closer to iron. "I am going to fix it. I want you to know that, whatever it takes." Ben said nothing for a moment. "Then all right. All right, you believe me? Or all right, you'll help?" "Both," he said. She turned and looked at him, and there was something in her expression he had not seen there before, something that was not efficiency and not composure, but something more raw than either. "Thank you," she said, not politely, the way people said it when they meant it from somewhere deep. Ben nodded and walked back out into the April morning. And he did not let himself examine what he was feeling, because he was a man who had learned a long time ago that some things were better left alone. 3 weeks passed. In those 3 weeks, Ben learned several things about Adeline Foster. The first was that she was not afraid of hard work, she was simply entirely unacquainted with it, which was a different problem entirely. He showed her how to handle a fence post, and she blistered her palms within an hour, but said nothing about it. He showed her how to read a horse's behavior, and she listened with absolute attention and asked questions that told him she was building a framework in her mind, connecting things into a logic she could use. She ruined the first 3 meals she cooked on the old iron stove and presented them to herself with the exact same expression a general might use when reporting a tactical loss: acknowledgement, adjustment, moving forward. She did not ask him to tell her she was doing well. She did not ask for encouragement. She watched, she tried. She failed. She tried again. The second thing he learned was that she had more money than her careful exterior suggested, but that she was spending it with a precision that told him she knew exactly how much she had and how long it needed to last. She bought materials with judgment. She paid the men from town who came to help with the barn repair promptly and fairly, and kept a running ledger that she reviewed every evening. She was not careless. She was not spoiled. She was just a woman who had come from a world where problems were solved with money, and was slowly, painfully, honestly learning that some problems required something else entirely. The third thing he learned about Adeline Foster was the one he had not expected. She had a sense of humor. He found it by accident on the 18th day. They had been trying to move a fence post that was sunk a foot deeper than it should have been, the result of a previous owner's apparently heroic effort at over-engineering, and after 40 minutes of leverage and profanity on Ben's part, the post had not moved a single inch. He stopped and stood up straight and looked at the post. "I believe," he said, "that this post has decided to become part of the earth." "It seems committed," Adeline agreed. "We could work around it. We could build the whole fence around this one immovable post as a kind of monument." He looked at her. She was looking at the post with an expression of perfect deadpan consideration. And then her eyes flicked to his. It was the tiniest thing. But something shifted between them in that moment, something that had nothing to do with fence posts or 40 acres or either of their pasts, and Ben became aware, in a way he had not been before, that Adeline Foster was 28 years old and had eyes that were an almost impossible shade of blue, and that she was standing 3 feet away from him in the April afternoon, with mud on her city boots and chalk dust on her sleeve, and she was quietly and entirely beautiful. He picked up the digging bar again. "Or we move it," he said. "Yes," she agreed, "we move it." They got the post out 20 minutes later, and neither of them mentioned the moment that had passed between them, but it was there in the afternoon air like something that had been said out loud. The trouble arrived in the form of Harrison Cade. Ben heard about him before he met him, in the way that men like Harrison Cade tended to travel, with their reputation preceding them like an advance rider. Harrison Cade owned 3,000 acres 40 miles north of Millhaven and had built his wealth on cattle and land speculation, and a particular gift for recognizing properties that were failing and acquiring them before they finished failing. He was 44 years old, silver-haired, well-dressed, and possessed of the kind of confidence that came not from experience, but from having been right enough times that he had stopped entertaining the possibility of being wrong. Walt Pruitt told Ben about Cade's arrival on a Thursday morning, leaning on the same fence post he always used, with the same expression he always wore when he had news he considered interesting. "He's been to see the Foster woman twice already." Ben kept his attention on the wire he was stretching. "Is that so?" Made her an offer for the property. "Decent one," Walt said. "Enough to send her back to Boston comfortable." "She turned him down?" "First time. She's going again tonight to his hotel." Walt paused. "Man sets a good table, they say." Invited her for dinner. Ben did not say anything. He thought about the way Adeline had looked at the property 3 weeks ago, the iron in her voice, when she said she was going to fix it. The way she said it, like a thing she had decided in her bones. He thought about Harrison Cade's silver hair and 3,000 acres and good table. He thought about his $11.40. He went back to the wire. "Just thought you'd want to know," Walt said. Said Ben. He finished the wire. He did not go to town that evening. But he thought about it. Adeline came to the property the next morning, earlier than usual. Ben had not arrived yet, and she was already at the well when he rode up. Making notes in her ledger, he tied Clementine and walked over, and she looked up. "Good morning," she said, and she said it first now. Without having to remember, he had noticed that morning. He looked at the well. "How's the collar holding?" "Perfectly. Cooper and his son did good work." She made a notation. "I have a question for you." He waited. "Mr. Cade offered me $900 for this property last week. He offered me $1,100 last night." She said it evenly. The way she said most things. "He seems to believe the offer will only become more attractive if I receive it in a better setting." Ben looked at the well. "What did you tell him?" "I told him I would think about it." She paused. "I am thinking about it now." She looked up. "What would you tell me?" He was quiet for a moment. "I'd tell you it's your property and your decision." "That is not an answer." "No," he agreed. "It's not." She watched him, patient and precise. He exhaled slowly. "The property's worth more than $1,100 once the well and barn are solid, and there's decent fence on the north line," he said. "In 2 years, with good management, that number doubles. Cade knows that. He's making the offer now because he knows the gap between what it looks like and what it's worth, and he's betting you don't." Adeline looked at him for a long, steady moment. "Is that why he keeps taking me to dinner?" she asked. Ben said nothing. "Because I wondered," she added, and her voice was very dry and very quiet, whether the tablecloth was part of the offer. Something moved in Ben's chest that he had no name for. "Could be," he said. "That is also not an answer." "No," he said. "It is also not." She looked down at her ledger. He looked at the well. And neither of them said the thing that was sitting between them in the morning air, large and unaddressed and growing more complicated by the hour. The moment that changed everything came at the end of that week, and Ben did not see it coming. He had been working alone on the north fence line, a long and unglamorous task. Methodical, requiring more patience than skill, when Adeline arrived an hour earlier than expected and did not go to the well or the barn or the cabin, but came directly to where he was working. He heard her before he saw her, the sound of her boots on the dry ground. And he turned. She had been crying. Not actively, she had clearly stopped, and had clearly not wanted to be seen while it was happening. and had probably walked hard for a few minutes to get the evidence off her face, but he could see it. Her eyes were red at the corners, her composure was back. But it was the kind of composure that is assembled quickly from pieces that are still shaking. "Miss Foster," he said. She held up one hand, a short, precise gesture that meant don't, and she meant it. So he didn't. She came and stood beside him at the fence line and looked out at the property, and was quiet for a long time. He waited. He was good at waiting. "I had a letter from my mother this morning," she said finally. "She believes I am making a mistake. She believes I should take Mr. Cade's offer, return to Boston, and find her words a more suitable life." Her voice was steady, but he could hear the places where it was working to be steady. "She says this is not a life for a woman of my background." Ben said nothing. "She is probably right," Adeline continued, in the tone of someone examining a wound honestly. "I do not know how to run a ranch. I ruin meals. I blister my hands on fence posts. I nearly fell off a horse twice on the way here this morning." She paused. "The north fence line is half done and the south pasture still needs work, and I have exactly $460 left in my operational fund, and I have no idea if that's enough." Ben was quiet for a moment. "It's enough," he said. She turned to look at him. "For the fence," he said. "$460 is enough. If you do more of the labor yourself and I bring in Tom Greer's boy for 2 days instead of 4, it covers everything on the north line and leaves you something for the pasture." She stared at him. "I didn't ask you to solve it," she said quietly. "No." "Ma'am, you didn't." She stopped. He looked at her and waited. "I was telling you because I needed to say it to someone," she admitted. And it was the most unguarded thing she had said to him in 3 weeks. "I needed to hear it out loud and have someone not immediately tell me what to do about it." He understood that. "I'm sorry," he said. "I'll be quiet." She made a sound that was almost a laugh, though it didn't quite make it all the way. They stood together at the north fence line, with the Colorado morning coming in wide and clear all around them. And Ben Calloway kept his word and was quiet, and Adeline Foster stood beside him and breathed. And between them, without either of them deciding it, something settled into place that was going to be very difficult to undo. 2 days later, Harrison Cade came to the property himself. Ben was up on the barn repairing the south wall when he saw the buggy coming up the road, a good buggy, well sprung, with a matched pair of blacks pulling it. He watched it come without moving from where he was. Cade stepped down from the buggy and looked around the property with the expression of a man calculating, and then he looked up at Ben on the barn roof and said, with perfect pleasantness, "You must be Calloway." "I must be," Ben agreed. "Harrison Cade." He did not offer a hand, which was interesting, since he was the one looking up. "I have business with Miss Foster. She's at the well." Cade looked toward the well and then back up at Ben, and there was a moment, just a moment, in which Ben felt the weight of the comparison being made, and was entirely aware of what the outcome of that comparison would be. A man in a good suit with a matched pair of blacks and 3,000 acres. A man on a barn roof with chalk on his hands and a coffee tin with $11 in it, back in a cabin with a tilting porch. Cade said nothing. He walked toward the well. Ben watched him go and then turned back to the wall. He could hear their voices from where he worked, not the words, just the cadence, and he recognized the cadence of a man who was very good at making an argument sound like a kindness. He focused on the boards in front of him. He drove each nail with more precision than strictly necessary. After 20 minutes, the voices stopped. After 30, Ben heard footsteps below him, not the crisp, deliberate steps of a man who knew he'd won, but something slower and less certain. Then Cade's buggy moved down the road. Ben looked down. Adeline was standing below him, looking up. "He raised the offer again," she said. "How much?" "$1,400. Ben came down from the barn roof slowly and stood in front of her. He said nothing, because it was her decision, and he had already told her everything honest he had to tell. She looked at him. "He told me," she said carefully, "that a woman alone on this property is asking for trouble. That a working ranch needs a man at the center of it. That the best thing I could do for myself and for this land is to sell to someone who knows what they're doing." A pause. "He made it sound very reasonable. He would," Ben said. "He also said," she stopped. He waited. "He also said that you had nothing to offer me." Her voice was very quiet now. That a cowboy with a broken-down cabin and no prospects was not someone I should be taking counsel from on the value of my own property. The words landed exactly the way Cade had probably intended them to land. Ben held very still. He thought about his coffee tin. He thought about his tilting porch. He thought about everything in his life that a man like Harrison Cade would look at and recognize immediately as nothing. "He's not wrong," Ben said at last. And he was looking at her when he said it. So he saw the exact moment it hit her. Not like agreement. Like a wound. "Ben," she said, and it was the first time she had used his name. The first time, and it came out like something she had not meant to say, and could not take back. "That is the most foolish thing you have said to me in 3 weeks." He looked at her. "I have a broken-down cabin," he said. "A patched roof. A coffee tin with $11 in it. A reputation that buys exactly nothing at a bank. I know. A man like Cade is trying to buy my land for $700 less than it is worth," she said. And her voice was sharp and clear and entirely steady. "And he sent me a message through you. Did you notice that? He told you that you have nothing so that you would step back. He is not talking to me about the land anymore. He is trying to remove the only person who has told me the truth about it." She was breathing faster now, but her eyes were very steady. "You have told me the truth about every single thing on this property for 3 weeks without asking me for anything in return. Mr. Cade has taken me to dinner twice and lied to me both times." Her chin came up. "Tell me again which man has nothing to offer." Ben was quiet. He could feel his own heartbeat. "He can give you things I can't," he said. And he meant it honestly, the way he meant everything. "He can give me a check," she said. "That is not the same thing." The morning was very still around them. Ben looked at her, really looked, the way he did not let himself do very often, and what he saw in her face was not the careful composure of a Boston merchant's daughter. Not the efficiency of a woman making a business decision. It was something plainer and truer than either of those. She was looking at him the way someone looked at a thing they had only just understood the value of. He looked away first, because he was Benjamin Calloway, and he had learned a long time ago that some things were better left alone, and he was not yet certain that this was not still one of them. But it was getting harder. It was getting significantly harder. And when Adeline Foster went back to the cabin to review her ledger, Ben stood alone at the barn wall he had half repaired, and he looked out at the 40 acres that were becoming, slowly and stubbornly and against all reasonable odds, something worth saving, and he thought he had not had $11.40 out that coffee tin for very long. He had 15 now. It was not a fortune, but then, neither was what was growing between them. And somehow, impossibly, that had started to feel like enough. And somehow, impossibly, that had started to feel like enough, but Ben Calloway knew better than to trust a feeling that had no ground beneath it yet. He told himself that on the ride home. He told himself that again the next morning while he was making coffee. By the third morning, he had stopped telling himself anything at all and simply gone back to the property, because that was the only honest thing left to do. Adeline was already there when he arrived. She was standing at the south pasture with her ledger open and a pencil behind her ear and mud on her left boot up to the ankle. And she did not look up when he rode in, but she said, "The corner post on the south line shifted overnight. I think the ground is soft from the snowmelt." "I'll look at it," Ben said. "I already looked at it. It needs to be reset with a deeper collar, or it'll go again in a week." She turned a page. "I've been thinking about the drainage along that line. If we cut a shallow channel here," she pointed, not at him, but at the map she had sketched in the back of her ledger, "the runoff goes east instead of pooling against the post." He looked at her map. It was not a professional survey, but it was correct. He studied it for a long moment and felt something move in his chest that he recognized, distantly, as the particular feeling of being surprised by a person he thought he had already understood. "That'll work," he said. She looked up, and something quick and unguarded crossed her face. Pleasure. Honestly, the kind that comes before a person remembers to be dignified about it, and then it was gone, replaced by her usual composed attention. "Good," she said. "Let's start there." They did not speak about Harrison Cade. They did not speak about what she had said to Ben the day before, or the way he had looked away from her. They worked, And between the work were silences that were no longer uncomfortable, but had become something else, the kind of quiet that two people share when they have stopped needing to fill space with words and have started simply being in the same place without explanation. Ben noticed it. He suspected she did too. Neither of them named it. Walt Pruitt came by on a Tuesday with news, which was his primary function in Ben's life and one he performed with genuine dedication. Ben was at the grain store when Walt found him, and Walt had the look of a man carrying something interesting with both hands. "Cade's been talking," Walt said without preamble. Ben stacked 2 feed sacks and did not respond at the hotel. To Dorsey and the Alderman brothers and anyone else who'd listen, Walt leaned against the store counter. "Says the Foster woman's making a mistake. Says the property's not viable without real capital behind it. Says a man like you." Walt paused, and something in his face told Ben this was the part he found less comfortable to deliver. "Says a man like you giving her advice on her investment is like asking a man who's never owned a book how to run a library." The grain store was quiet. Ben set the 3rd sack down. "That what he said, close enough." Ben picked up the 4th sack. "Anything else?" Walt looked at him with the expression of a man who expected more reaction and was not sure whether the absence of it was admirable or alarming. "He's not wrong that you don't have capital," Walt said, carefully, in the tone of a man who considered himself a friend. "Ben, I'm just saying that if this woman is looking for help building something real, maybe." "Walt, yeah, I appreciate it." Walt was quiet for a moment. "He's been inviting her to supper again, and to the alderman's social next Friday." Another pause. "She's going to the social." Ben paid for his grain and carried it out to the wagon. He thought about Adeline sketching drainage channels in her ledger at 7 in the morning, with mud on her boot. He thought about a woman like that, at a social event in her blue city dress, with Harrison Cade standing beside her, explaining to everyone who she was. He put the grain in the wagon and climbed up and picked up the reins. "She's allowed to go to a social," he said. Walt looked at him. "That's all you've got?" "That's all I've got," Ben said, and drove back toward the property. The social was on a Friday evening, and Ben did not attend, because he had not been invited, and because he was not the kind of man who attended socials uninvited. He spent the evening on his porch with Rooster and a cup of coffee that had gone cold, listening to nothing in particular. He was not thinking about Adeline Foster at the alderman's social. He was thinking about the south pasture drainage and timeline for the barn repairs and whether the well columnar would need reinforcing before summer. That was what he told himself. He was still on the porch at 9 o'clock when he heard hoofbeats on the road coming fast. Not the easy canter of someone heading home, but the quick, purposeful rhythm of someone riding toward something specific. He stood up. The rider came out of the dark and pulled up at his gate. And even before the horse stopped completely, he recognized Adeline in her good dress. The blue one, her hair less neat than it had been in the morning. She dismounted before he could get to the gate. "What happened?" he said. Nothing happened. She was breathing a little fast from the ride. "I left the social. Are you all right?" "I am perfectly fine." She tied her horse to the gate post and turned to face him in the low light from his porch lamp. Mr. Cade gave a speech. Ben waited. He spoke about the importance of sound investment in the Colorado Territory. He spoke about the risk that inexperienced landowners posed to the local economy. He spoke. Her voice was very steady and very controlled. He spoke specifically about a woman trying to run a working property without a proper man's hand guiding it. And he looked at me while he said it. The anger in her was quiet and cold and absolutely real. Ben said nothing. "He did not say my name," she continued. He did not have to. Every person in that room knew exactly who he meant. Mrs. Alderman looked at me the way people look at someone who has done something embarrassing in public without knowing it. She stopped. I stayed for 20 minutes afterward because leaving immediately would have given him exactly what he wanted. "And then I left and came here," Ben said. She looked at him. "Yes," she said, "and came here." The word between them was not why. The word between them was something that didn't need to be said, because they both already knew the answer. Ben stepped back and held the porch gate open. "Coffee's cold," he said. "I can make a fresh pot, please," she said. She came up onto his tilting porch and sat in the second chair that he did not usually put out, but had put out 3 weeks ago without examining his reasons for doing it. and Ben went inside to make fresh coffee. And he stood at the stove with his back to the door and breathed very carefully. This was a woman who had just been publicly humiliated by a man with money and power and 3,000 acres. She had ridden to a cabin with a patched roof. He did not let himself read that as something it might not be. He made the coffee and brought it out, and they sat in the dark on his tilting porch. And for a while neither of them spoke. "Tell me about your father's ranch," she said. Eventually, Ben turned his cup in his hands. "Small place," he said. "Eastern Wyoming. My father ran about 200 head on good years. Less on bad years. What happened to it? Winter of '79. He was quiet for a moment. 3 months of it. We lost the cattle in the first month, the horses in the second. By March, there was nothing left to hold the note against, and the bank didn't wait." She was quiet. "How old were you?" 18. "What did you do?" "Worked," he shrugged. "Hired out as a hand wherever I could. Moved through Wyoming and into Colorado following work. Sent money back to my mother until she passed." He paused. "Then I stopped moving." "Why here?" "Because here is as good as anywhere," he said. "And because I had a little saved, and this is where the savings stopped feeling like enough to keep going." She turned that over in silence. "Do you regret it?" she asked. "Stopping here?" He thought about the cabin and the horses and his reputation in 40 miles of territory. "No," he said, "not a day, even though she stopped." "Even though what?" She looked at her cup. "My mother wrote that a man's worth is in what he can provide," she said. And her voice was very careful. "She said it about my father when I was young, to explain why certain men were better choices than others. She said it about Mr. Cade last week, and I kept thinking, when I was sitting in that room tonight, that she has never been wrong about very much." A pause. "But I am beginning to think that she is wrong about that." Ben said nothing. She looked up. "You fixed Thomas Greer's roof in January," she said. "You broke ice for the Harmon widow. You watched my father's land for 3 years without pay." Her voice was quiet, but there was iron in the quiet. "That is not nothing. That is not a man with nothing to offer. That is a man who has been so busy giving that no one bothered to add it up." Ben felt something behind his ribs that he had no clean word for. "Miss Foster, I am not finished." She was not sharp about it, but she was firm. "Harrison Cade has $1,400 to offer me. He also stood in front of 20 people tonight and made me small without using my name, because he thought it would make me easier to buy." She set her cup down on the porch rail. "I want you to understand something, Ben, and I want you to hear it plainly. Because I am not a woman who says things she does not mean." She met his eyes. "Whatever you think you have to offer or not offer it is more than what that man showed tonight. And I am not going to pretend I don't know the difference." The night was very still. Ben looked at her for a long moment. He looked at the dark beyond the porch. He looked back at her. "You should go home," he said quietly. "It's late and you rode fast and your horse needs water." She looked at him. Something crossed her face, not hurt, not quite, but something adjacent. "That is how you answer that?" she asked. "That's how I answer it tonight," he said. "Because I mean what I say too. And tonight I don't trust myself to say the right things." The honesty of it seemed to reach her in a way a more articulate answer might not have. She was quiet for a moment. Then she stood and picked up her cup and carried it inside and set it on his table without being asked. The way someone did who intended to come back, and she came out and went down the porch steps and untied her horse. "Good night, Ben," she said. "Good night, Miss Foster." She paused with one hand on the saddle. "Adeline," she said quietly. "My name is Adeline." And she rode back into the dark, and Ben stood on his tilting porch and watched her go. And the night was exactly as quiet as it had been before she arrived, and felt nothing like it. The next morning, Ben did something he had not done in 2 years. He went to see Martin Cole. Martin Cole was the closest thing Millhaven had to a land attorney, a practical, unsentimental man who wrote contracts and settled boundary disputes and charged fair prices for both, and who had known Ben Calloway long enough to be surprised when Ben sat down across from him at 8 in the morning. "Benjamin," Martin said, "what can I do for you?" "I want to understand something," Ben said. "About the Foster property." Martin folded his hands. "What about it? If she sells to Cade for 1,400, what does she get net of costs and debts?" Martin considered. "Gerald Foster left a note against the land. Small one about 200. After that and transfer costs, she clears perhaps a C 1100. And if she holds it 2 years? Martin looked at him. That depends considerably on what happens to the land in those 2 years. Assume the well is shored up. The barn is sound, the fencing's complete, and there's a small working herd on it. Martin was quiet for a moment. Then we're talking somewhere between $2,200 and $2,800 in land value, he said. Ben stood up. Estimate. Thank you. Martin watched him. Ben, he said, what Cade is doing is not illegal. I know that. He's a patient man. He'll keep at it. I know that too. Martin looked at him with the steady gaze of a man who had seen a great many things in a small town over a long time. What are you going to do? He asked. Ben picked up his hat. The right thing, he said. Same as always. He walked out before Martin could ask him what. Exactly. He considered the right thing to be, because he was not entirely sure himself. He told her that afternoon. He laid it out, simply the note her father had left against the land. The net number after costs, the 2-year projection with the same plain honesty he used for everything. And watched her face as she absorbed it. She sat very still. He knew, she said when Ben finished. Cade knew about my father's note. It's public record. He would have checked before he made the first offer. So the first offer, 900, wasn't generosity. It was math, yes. She looked at her ledger. He watched her work through it. The way she worked through everything methodically. Without drama, building the framework until it held. The drainage channel, she said finally. Sorry? That I mapped on Tuesday. She looked up. If it works, the south pasture can carry stock in the wet season. That changes the grazing rotation. Her pencil was moving before she finished the sentence. Sketching numbers in the margin. If I bring in 6 head before fall, that's income against the note by spring. She stopped writing. Ben. If I move quickly enough, I can clear the note before Cade finds another angle. He looked at the numbers she was writing. They were not wrong. You'd need stock, he said, and that costs money you don't have. I have 460 in the operational fund. 6 head of decent cattle costs more than that, I know. She kept writing. But I also know a woman in Boston who has been very patient about being repaid a loan I made to her 3 years ago. She did not look up. I'm going to write her tonight and ask her to be patient 1 more year. In exchange for 10% of whatever the property earns at sale, or 10% of the assessed value in 2 years. Whichever comes first. Ben was quiet. That's smart, she said. Before he could say anything else, I know it's smart. I am occasionally smart, despite what Mr. Cade appears to believe. Ben looked at her. And for the first time, he let himself smile at her, fully not the almost smile he had allowed himself before. Not the barely there twitch at the corner of his mouth, but a real one. Her eyes went to it immediately, the way eyes did when they had been waiting for something. She looked back at her ledger. Her pencil moved, but a color had come into her face that had not been there before. The cattle arrived 3 weeks later, 6 head. Young, healthy. Purchased through a man named Sutcliffe, who ran a small breeding operation 12 miles east, and who gave Adeline a fair price because Ben vouched for her, and because Sutcliffe was the kind of man who responded to vouching from Ben Calloway. Ben watched them come off the trailer. She did not know what she was looking at. He could tell that, but she was looking very hard. The way she always looked at things she was in the process of understanding. The dark one favors her left rear leg slightly, he said. Quiet, just for her. Adeline watched the dark hiver move. She's lame? Not lame, just cautious. She took a knock loading. Most likely, give her a day. Adeline watched the heifer. What if she doesn't improve? I'll look at her. What if it's serious? Then we deal with it. She turned to look at him. You say that like it's simple. It's not simple, he said. But it's the only answer that's ever true. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she looked back at the cattle. They're beautiful, she said. And the way she said it honestly, without any polish on it, made him quietly certain that she was going to be all right. It was the Harmon widow who told Ben what Cade had done. He had been at the widow's place fixing a gate hinge, one of the irregular tasks he performed for people who needed it, and did not ask for payment when Martha Harmon came out with a cup of coffee and sat on her step and said, with the directness of a woman who had been on her own for 8 years and had learned to say things plainly. Cade went to see Gerald Foster's old solicitor in Denver. Ben set down the hinge. When, last week, Tobias Reeves' boy saw him coming out of the office. She wrapped her hands around her cup. I don't know what he was looking for, but there's only one reason a man like Cade goes to a dead man's solicitor. Ben knew what the reason was. He turned it over in his mind on the ride back to town. Gerald Foster had left a land note. Notes had conditions. If there were conditions in the note that Adeline didn't know about, terms that could be triggered, deadlines that were coming, a man who found them in the right office would have leverage that $1,400 couldn't buy. He rode faster. He found Adeline at the cabin, the Foster cabin, which she had been slowly making livable over the past weeks, reviewing her ledger, as she usually was in the late afternoon. She looked up when he came in, and she must have read something in his face, because she closed the ledger before he spoke. "What is it?" she asked. He told her what Martha Harmon had told him. She listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "There is a condition in the note," she said. Ben went very still. "You knew? My father's solicitor wrote to me before I left Boston." She looked at her ledger. "The note carries a 12-month operational clause. If the property shows no productive use within 12 months of the transfer date, no income, no working stock, no demonstrated management, the note holder can call it due immediately." She paused. "The transfer date was March 15th. My father died March 2nd. Ben did a quick and unpleasant calculation. "That's 13 months from now," he said. "You have time. I have time if everything goes correctly." Her voice was measured. "If the cattle produce, if the pasture holds, if the well stays sound." She looked up at him. "If Mr. Cade has found that clause, he is not going to wait for things to go wrong on their own." She said it without drama. Just the clear-eyed recognition of a woman who understood now exactly what kind of game she was in. Ben pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. "Then we don't give him a reason," he said. "We hit every mark on that clause before he can move. Documented production, income on record, stock on the land." He looked at her steadily. "He can't call a note that's being met." "He might not need to call the note," she said. "He might simply tell the note holder I'm in trouble and make an offer to acquire it. Then he holds the note instead of the bank." "Who holds it now?" "A man named Patterson. Denver." "Do you know him?" "I know of him. My father mentioned him once in a letter." She paused. "He is not someone my father considered a friend," Ben thought. "I know a man in Denver," he said slowly. "George Tolliver. He does land work. Honest man, knows everyone in that office building. He could make contact with Patterson, not on your behalf openly. Just a professional conversation, and find out where Patterson stands before Cade gets there." She looked at him. "You would do that? I'd write tonight if you want." She studied his face. There was something in her eyes that he had been seeing more often lately, something she was clearly trying to keep back, or at least trying to wait on, and it made him look away. Because looking at it directly was becoming something he could only do for short periods before he had to stop. "Why do you keep doing this?" she asked, and her voice was very quiet. He looked back. "Doing what?" "Finding the next thing. Before I've finished being afraid of the last thing." "You have already found the answer to it." She was not accusing him. She was genuinely asking why. He was quiet for a moment. "Because the problem doesn't wait for you to be done being afraid," he said. "It just stays there. Might as well meet it moving." She looked at him for a long time. "Ben," she said, "Adeline." She took a breath. "If this doesn't work," she stopped. "If Cade finds a way, and the note is called, and I have to sell, I want you to know that what you have done here." She pressed her lips together and started again. "What you have done for me, for this property, without any obligation." "Stop," he said. She looked at him. "Don't thank me for something that isn't finished yet," he said. "When it's finished, then you can thank me." Something crossed her face. She nodded once and looked down, and he saw her jaw work briefly with something she did not say. And he understood exactly what she was holding back, and why. Because he was holding back the same thing, and he knew exactly how much effort that took. "Write to Tolliver," she said finally. "Tonight," he said. He kept his word. The letter came back in 11 days. Ben read it alone first because it came to his address. And then he went to Adeline. He found her in the south pasture checking the dark heifer. who had in fact come right on the second day, and was now the most settled of the six. The one who ate first and moved without hurry seemed to have decided the pasture was acceptable. He waited until she saw him coming and walked out to meet him. He held out the letter. She read it standing in the south pasture, with the heifer watching her from 20 feet away. And as she read, her face went through three things in quick succession: relief, then something sharp and alarmed, then a stillness that Ben had come to recognize as the expression she wore when she was deciding what to do. She folded the letter. "Patterson has already been contacted by a representative of Cade's," she said. "Tolliver says Patterson is considering. When does he decide?" 3 weeks. Ben looked at the heifer. 3 weeks, he said. "Yes. Then we have 3 weeks to give Patterson a reason to hold." She looked at him. "Tolliver says Patterson is a practical man, not warm, but fair. If he sees the property as viable, real documentation, real numbers, real production, he is less likely to sell the note. Can Tolliver get us a meeting?" She had already unfolded the letter again and was reading. "He says he can arrange a visit," she said slowly. "If we come to Denver, both of us." She lowered the letter. "He says it would be stronger if you came. That a man who knows the territory and can speak to the land's potential." She stopped. He put it more diplomatically than that. Ben understood what Tolliver had actually meant. A woman alone presenting her case to a Denver man of business was one picture. A woman with a man who knew the land and the work and could speak plainly to both of them was a different picture. It was not fair. It was true. When, he asked. End of next week. He thought about his other work, the commitments he had, the people depending on him for ordinary things. He thought about Adeline standing in a Denver office with a man who was considering whether to hand her note to Harrison Cade. "I'll arrange it," he said. She looked at him, and this time she did not say anything at all, because there was nothing to say that the moment hadn't already said, and they both knew it. The heifer put her head down and pulled at the new spring grass, and the south pasture lay quiet around them. And Ben Calloway looked at the woman standing 3 feet from him with a folded letter in her hand and a cattle operation that was 3 weeks from being either saved or swallowed. And he thought about all the things he did not have. He thought about them clearly and honestly and in full. And then he thought about every morning she had arrived before him, every drainage channel she had sketched before breakfast, every meal she had ruined and made again without complaint, every time she had asked him a question and then actually listened to the answer. He had told himself from the beginning that he was man with nothing to offer a woman like this. He was beginning to wonder if he had been wrong about what the word nothing meant. Because standing here, in the property that was becoming something, beside the woman who was making it so, he did not feel like a man with nothing. He felt for the first time in a long time like exactly enough. He felt for the first time in a long time like exactly enough, and that feeling terrified him more than anything Harrison Cade had ever done. Because hope was the most dangerous thing a man like Ben Calloway could carry. He had learned that at 18, standing in an empty yard in Wyoming where a ranch used to be, understanding for the first time that the world did not adjust itself to what a man deserved. He had spent 17 years since then being careful with hope, keeping it small, keeping it practical, pointed at things that could actually be built: a repaired fence, a shored well, a barn wall that would hold through winter. Not at a woman from Boston with blue eyes and a ledger full of drainage maps who said his name like it was something she had decided to trust. He wrote to Tolliver that night and confirmed the meeting. He did not examine what he was doing beyond that. They left for Denver on a Thursday, riding the morning stage because it was faster than a wagon and Adeline's bay mare was not built for distance at speed. Ben sat across from her in the stage with 2 other passengers, a dry goods merchant from Pueblo and a young woman traveling to meet her husband, and Adeline sat with her hands folded in her lap and her back straight and her face in the composed arrangement she used for situations she was moving through on determination rather than comfort. She had dressed carefully, not the blue city dress, something darker, more deliberate, a dark gray wool that said she understood. She was walking into a room where she would be assessed and had chosen her armor accordingly. Ben was wearing his best shirt, which was also his only good shirt, and his boots were clean. He was aware that he looked like what he was. He did not try to look like anything else. The merchant from Pueblo attempted conversation twice and gave up both times, not because either of them was rude, but because neither of them had space in their attention for it. After the first hour, the merchant fell asleep. The young woman looked out the window. And, in the small contained world of the stage, Ben and Adeline sat across from each other, in a silence that had weight and texture, and things moving through it that neither of them was saying. "Tell me about Patterson," she said finally. "Tolliver says he's 60. Maybe 62. Came up from land work in Missouri. Moved to Denver when the territory opened. Made his money in notes and mortgages, the kind of work that requires patience and arithmetic and no particular attachment to outcomes. Meaning he doesn't care who wins. Meaning he cares about security. A note that's being met is better to him than a note sold to Cade at a discount. If the margin is close enough." Ben looked at her. "Tolliver says he's fair. That's the best I can tell you." She absorbed that. "What does he need to see?" "Numbers that hold. Documentation that the property is producing." And he paused. "A person he believes." She looked at him directly. "He needs to believe me. Yes, not just see a ledger. A ledger helps. But a ledger's a piece of paper. People decide based on people." She was quiet for a moment. "And you think he'll believe me more if you're there?" Ben did not flinch from the truth of it. "I think he'll take the meeting more seriously," he said. "That's not fair, and I'm not pretending it is. But it's what Tolliver said. And Tolliver knows the room better than I do." She looked at her folded hands. "My mother would say this is exactly why a woman needs a man managing her business." Her voice was dry. "She would be wrong about the reason and right about the outcome." "You're managing your business," Ben said. "I'm a man who knows how to read land. That's all I am in that room." She looked up at him. Something moved through her expression, something complicated, and warm and quickly redirected toward the window. "All right," she said quietly. The stage rolled on toward Denver. And Ben watched the road ahead, and he did not say the other thing, the thing that was true, and that he had no right to say yet, which was that he would be in that room for her whether Tolliver had suggested it or not, because he had stopped being able to think about her problems as separate from his own. And he did not know exactly when that had happened, but he knew it was too late to undo. Patterson's office was on the third floor of a brick building on Larimer Street. And the man himself was exactly what Tolliver's description had suggested: 61. Gray, unhurried, with the careful eyes of someone who had spent 40 years, watching people tell him what their property was worth and learning to see through the number to the truth beneath it. He shook Ben's hand and nodded to Adeline and gestured them both to chairs and sat down behind his desk and folded his hands and waited. Adeline opened her ledger. She laid it on the desk, not pushed across, just placed within his reach if he chose to look, and she began. She spoke for 12 minutes without stopping, and Ben sat beside her and watched Patterson's face. And what he saw in that face was something he had not entirely expected. The man was listening, not politely. Actually listening, the kind of listening that required work, that tracked numbers and tested them internally against what he already knew, that looked for the place where confidence became performance. He did not find that place, because Adeline Foster was not performing. She knew her numbers the way Ben knew his land in her bones, from the work of understanding them directly, not from having someone else explain them to her. She laid out the operational clause and the 12-month timeline. She laid out the stock acquisition, the cost against the operational fund, the expected spring production. She described the well repair, the fence completion, the barn. She showed him the drainage map, her own sketched map, from the back of the ledger, and explained what it would do for the south pasture in wet season. When she finished, Patterson looked at the ledger for a long moment. Then he looked at Ben. "You've seen this property," Patterson said. "Yes, sir. What she's describing, is it accurate?" "It's accurate," Ben said. "Conservative on some points." Patterson looked at him steadily. "Cade came to me 2 weeks ago," he said. "Offered to acquire the note at a premium. Said the property was distressed and the current holder was in over her head." Ben said nothing. Patterson looked at Adeline. "You don't look in over your head," he said. "I am not," she replied, and her voice was perfectly level. "The offer Cade made me was attractive," Patterson continued. "He's a credible buyer, he has resources. He has resources, Adeline agreed. He does not have accurate information about my property. The assessment he is working from understates current value by at least 40%. She turned to the page in the ledger where she had done that calculation. I can show you the basis for that figure. Patterson reached across the desk and turned the ledger toward himself. He read. The office was very quiet. Ben watched Patterson's eyes move across the numbers, and he felt the particular tension of a moment that was going to go one way or the other and could not be influenced by anything except what was already on the page. Then Patterson set the ledger down. I'm not selling the note, he said. The room was still. Adeline's hands were very still on the armrests. The note stays where it is, Patterson said. You meet your terms. We have no conversation. You miss a term, we have a conversation. He looked at her. But I am not selling a viable note to a land speculator at a discount. That's not how I operate. He stood. The meeting was over. Ben stood and shook the man's hand. Adeline stood and thanked him plainly, without excess, and picked up her ledger, and they walked out. They were on the stairs before Ben heard it. A small sound. Just one. He looked at her. She was walking down the stairs with her ledger under her arm and her back straight and her face forward. And the sound had been so small and so quickly contained that he might have imagined it. He did not think he had imagined it. He said nothing until they reached the street. Then he stopped and turned to face her. Adeline. She stopped and looked at him. And her eyes were bright in the particular way that had nothing to do with happiness. I am fine, she said before he could speak. I know you are. I am not going to. She stopped. I just need a moment. He gave her the moment. He stood on Larimer Street and looked at the traffic moving past and gave her whatever space the street allowed, which was not much, and after a moment she breathed slowly and steadily, and he felt rather than saw the composure come back, settling around her like something she was practiced at putting on. He said no to Cade, she said. He did. That was not. I did not know if that was going to happen. Neither did I. She looked at him. And then she did something she had not done before. She reached out and put her hand on his arm just briefly, just for a moment, the lightest possible contact, and then she took it back. Thank you for coming with me, she said. Ben looked at the place on his arm where her hand had been. Of course, he said. They stood on Larimer Street in Denver, and the world moved around them, and neither of them said anything else for a moment, because there was not anything to say that would improve on the moment they were standing in. The trouble with surviving one crisis is that it creates a brief and dangerous window in which a person feels safe. Ben knew this. He knew it the way he knew weather from experience. From the particular ache of times he had let his guard down too soon and paid for it. He tried to tell himself this on the stage ride back. He tried to stay practical, stay useful, think about the South pasture and the note timeline, and the work that was still ahead. He managed it for most of the return journey. What he could not manage was the last hour, when the light had gone soft and the merchant from Pueblo was asleep again, and the young woman had dozed against the window, and Adeline had fallen asleep in the corner of the seat across from him, not gracefully, not with composure, but like a person who had been running on determination for several days and had finally run out of it. Her head was tipped slightly against the side of the stage. Her hands were loose in her lap. Her ledger had slid 6 inches and she had not noticed. Ben reached across and straightened it before it fell. And then he sat back and looked at the road through the window and did not look at her again for a long time. But he was aware of her the entire hour, the way a man was aware of something he was trying very hard not to want. They arrived back in Millhaven at dusk, and Ben walked Adeline to the livery, where her horse was stabled, and waited while she collected the mare. And then he rode beside her as far as the property gate. He stopped at the gate. She stopped too and looked at him. Will you come tomorrow? She asked. Yes. The south fence line needs the last section finished. I know. She nodded and turned toward the property. And then she stopped and turned back. Ben, he waited. What Cade said to you? She chose the words carefully. About having nothing to offer. About being a man a woman like me shouldn't take counsel from. She met his eyes. I want you to know that I have thought about what he said, and I think he is more afraid of you than he has let anyone see. Ben looked at her. Why afraid? Because he can calculate everything you don't have, she said. He cannot calculate what you are. And men like Cade, men who operate entirely on calculation, are frightened by things that don't fit their arithmetic. She rode through the gate. He sat on Clementine and watched her go, and he thought about arithmetic and what fit into it and what didn't. And he thought about a woman who had spent 3 months learning an entirely new language, the language of land and labor and patience, because she had decided it was worth knowing. He rode home in the dark. He did not sleep well. Harrison Cade came back 12 days later. Not to the property. To Ben. He came to Ben's cabin on a Tuesday morning and knocked on the door like a man who expected it to open. And Ben opened it because he answered his door. Cade was alone, which was either a sign of confidence or a sign that he did not want witnesses. Ben looked at him, Mr. Cade. Calloway. Cade looked at the cabin the way he had looked at the Foster property, with the professional eye of a man who was calculating. I'd like to have a conversation with you. All right, may I come in? Ben stepped back. Cade came in and stood in the cabin and looked around without sitting down. And Ben stood by the door and waited. I know you went to Denver, Cade said. I know you spoke to Patterson. He turned. I want you to understand that I am not angry about that. I would have done the same thing. Ben said nothing. The Foster woman is making a mistake, Cade continued. Not out of foolishness, she's clearly not foolish. Out of inexperience. She does not understand what this territory asks of a working ranch, and by the time she does, she will have spent everything she has learning it. He paused. I am trying to save her from that, are you? Ben said. I am making a fair offer, more than fair. Cade looked at him directly. You know that. I know the land is worth more than your offer. In 2 years, possibly. In the current market, with the current state of the property is in better state than it 2 months ago, Ben said. And it'll be in better state 2 months from now. Cade looked at him. Because of you. His voice was measured. Because you are doing work on that property that you are not being paid for adequately. Because you are investing your time and your knowledge and your reputation in a project that does not belong to you and will not benefit you. He tilted his head slightly. Why is that, Calloway? The room was quiet. Ben looked at him steadily. She asked for help, Ben said. People do that out here. Other people help. It's a simple system. It is not a simple system, Cade said. It is a system with an implied exchange. You are expecting something in return, am I? Everyone expects something in return. Cade moved toward the door. I want to be direct with you, because I think you're a man who prefers it. Walk away from this property. Leave Miss Foster to make her own decision without your influence. If she sells, which she will eventually, because she has to, she gets a good price and goes back to the life she came from. He stopped at the door. If she doesn't sell, she spends 2 years trying to run a working cattle operation with no experience, depletes everything she has, and ends up in the same place at a worse time. And your interest in the outcome is purely for her benefit. My interest is in the land, Cade said, without embarrassment. But the outcome I described is also true. Ben held the door open. Good morning, Mr. Cade, he said. Cade looked at him for a moment. You are a stubborn man, he said, and it was not entirely hostile. Yes, sir, Ben agreed. I am. Cade left. Ben stood at his door and watched the buggy go down the road and felt something cold settling in his chest, not fear exactly, but the recognition of a man who knew the difference between a battle that was over and a battle that had just changed shape. He told Adeline that afternoon. All of it, plainly, the way he told her everything. She listened, without interrupting, and when he finished, she was quiet for a moment that stretched long enough to tell him she was not just absorbing the information, but thinking through everything underneath it. He came to you, she said. Yes. No. She looked at her ledger and then put it aside, which was something she rarely did when there was still daylight. He thinks you're the obstacle, she said slowly. He thinks if he removes you, persuades you to step back, I'll make the decision he wants. She looked up. He doesn't think I'm capable of making a decision he can't manage. He thinks you're the one managing me. The anger in her voice was very quiet and very real. Adeline, no, you're not managing me, she said sharply. I know that. I am saying what he thinks. She stood up and walked to the window, the cabin window that looked out on the south pasture where 6 young head were grazing on the grass she had helped plant. He has never once spoken to me as though I am the person making the decisions. Every conversation has been a performance designed to make me feel uncertain and then offer me a way out." She turned back. "He doesn't know you told me about the note clause." "No. He doesn't know I went to Patterson myself. He knows we went. He doesn't know what you said." She nodded slowly. "Then he still thinks I am operating in the dark." A pause. "Let him think that." Ben looked at her. "What are you planning?" "Nothing yet." She picked her ledger back up. "But I want him confident. I want him to believe I am still uncertain. Still persuadable, still someone he can wait out." She met his eyes. "People make mistakes when they are confident." Ben was quiet for a moment. "That is a more strategic thought than I expected this afternoon." Something close to a smile moved across her face. "I grew up in a merchant's house," she said. "My father used to say that the person who controls the information controls the room." She paused. "I always thought he meant it about business. I think he may have meant it about everything." Ben looked at her the ledger. The window, the south pasture, the woman who had mapped drainage channels before breakfast, and was now thinking 3 moves ahead of a man with 3,000 acres. He thought about what Kate had said, that Ben was expecting something in return. He thought about whether that was true. He thought about it honestly. The way he tried to think about everything. And then he stopped thinking about it, because thinking about it clearly was going to lead somewhere. He was not ready to go yet. The complication arrived in a form Ben had not anticipated. Her name was Clara Whitfield. She arrived in Millhaven on the same stage that brought the May mail, and she was 26 years old and very pretty in the way that required no particular effort. With dark hair and an easy laugh and the kind of self-possession that comes from having been admired for long enough that it no longer required maintenance. Ben had known her 3 years ago, when she had come through with her family on the way to a mining claim in the mountains. She had stayed 3 weeks. They had spent considerable time together during those 3 weeks, and parted on terms that were warm and uncomplicated and geographically resolved. She came to find him on a Wednesday at the Foster property, where she should not have known to look, and which meant that someone had told her. He was at the north fence when he heard her call his name. He turned and recognized her, and felt the particular internal adjustment of a person encountering a past they had considered finished. "Clara," he said. "Ben Calloway." She was smiling. "Walt Pruitt said I'd find you here." She looked at the fence, then at the property, then at him. "He also said you've been spending a great deal of time on this place." "Working," Ben said. Her smile heard. "Working very hard." According to Walt. He did not have to ask what Walt had implied. He could hear it in the particular cadence of very hard. He heard footsteps behind him and knew before he turned who they belonged to. Adeline was coming from the direction of the cabin, carrying water for the afternoon work. She stopped when she saw Clara. Something crossed her face just briefly, just a moment, and then it was gone, replaced by the composure that Ben could now read as clearly as weather, because he knew the difference between composure that was resting and composure that was working. This was working. "I'm sorry," Adeline said, looking between them. "I didn't know you had company." "Adeline Foster," Ben said. "This is Clara Whitfield. She traveled through Millhaven a few years back." "Miss Whitfield." Adeline's voice was perfect. "Welcome back, Miss Foster." Clara looked at her with frank, uncomplicated interest. "I've heard about your property." "Ben's been doing wonderful work here." "He has," Adeline agreed. "We're very fortunate to have his help." The word was entirely natural and entirely deliberate, and Ben heard both things simultaneously. Clara heard it too, he thought, because her gaze moved back to him with something slightly more attentive in it. "I'm passing through again," Clara said. "I'll be in Millhaven through the weekend." "I hoped you might have time for supper, Ben. Catch up." Ben looked at her. "I'll have to see where the work stands," he said. "Of course." Clara's smile was easy, no pressure. "I know where to find you, apparently." She looked at Adeline again, and this time the look was slightly longer. "Miss Foster, you've done something remarkable here, they say." "I have had excellent help," Adeline said, and her voice was perfectly warm and perfectly unreadable. Clara left. Ben turned back to the fence behind him. He heard Adeline set the water pail down on the ground with slightly more force than the task required. He kept his attention on the wire in his hands. A full minute passed. "Old friend?" Adeline asked, and her voice was completely neutral. Something like that, Ben said. Another pause. She's very pretty, Adeline said. Yes, Ben agreed. And it was an honest answer, and he gave it plainly, because he did not lie. The silence that followed had a different texture than their usual silences. He turned around. She was looking at the fence, not at him. With her arms crossed and her jaw set in the way it set when she was working through something she was not ready to say. Adeline, he said. The fence isn't going to finish itself, she said, and bent to pick up the pail. He watched her walk back toward the cabin. He turned back to the fence. He drove the next 4 staples with considerable precision and considerable force. And the fence did not benefit especially from his feelings, but it held. He did not go to supper with Clara Whitfield. He made no plan to. But the fact of her presence in Millhaven through the weekend sat in the back of his mind like a splinter. Small and persistent, and what bothered him about it was not Clara herself, but the mirror she held up to a question he had been carefully not asking. He was 35 years old. He had never let himself want something he could not have badly enough to say so out loud. He had always known with absolute clarity where the line was between what he could offer a person and what a person deserved to be offered. And he had always stayed on the right side of that line. But the line was moving, he could feel it moving. And the thing about a line that moves is that it is much harder to honor than one that stays still. 3 days later, Adeline came to find him. Not at the property, at his cabin. Early morning, the way she had come the very first time before 6. The light still thin, and he heard the knock and opened the door, and she was standing on his tilting porch. But this time she was not composed. She was holding a letter. "My mother is coming," she said. Ben looked at the letter in her hand. "When? 2 weeks, from Boston. She says she has come to help me make the right decision." Adeline's voice was very controlled. "She has corresponded with Mr. Cade." These assembled themselves in Ben's mind with unpleasant speed. "Cade invited her," he said. "He offered to cover her travel costs." She folded the letter. She accepted. Her chin came up. "My mother is a practical woman. She does not do things without reason. She is coming because she believes I am making an emotional decision, and she is going to try to correct it. And Cade covered her travel because he thinks she'll move you where he hasn't been able to." "Yes." Ben was quiet. "He is not wrong that she influences me," Adeline said. And the admission cost her something. "She is my mother. She is usually right, and she is not coming as an enemy. She is coming because she genuinely believes she is protecting me." She stopped. "That is what makes it hard. I cannot be angry at her the way I am angry at him. Because she is not doing this to hurt me." Ben understood that. He understood it in the particular way of someone who had also been managed by people who loved them. "What do you need?" he asked. She looked at him, and for the second time, without planning it, she said exactly what was true. "I need to know that what I am building here is real," she said. "Not just on paper, not just in my ledger. I need to know that when she arrives and sees this place and meets the people who helped build it, that she will see something that is worth choosing." Her eyes were very direct. "Is it real, Ben?" He looked at her. He thought about the south pasture. He thought about 6 head of cattle on spring grass. He thought about a well collar that held through April. He thought about a woman who mapped drainage channels before breakfast and read land the way she read a room, with patience, with intelligence, with a willingness to be wrong and try again. He thought about all the things he did not have. He thought about all the things she had built. "Yes," he said, "it's real." She held his gaze for a long moment. And then she said the thing that broke the careful distance he had maintained since the first morning she appeared on his tilting porch. "Is this real?" she asked, and her voice was very quiet. "What is between us? Is that real too?" The morning was very still. Ben looked at her. He thought about his coffee tin and his patched roof and his 11, now $23. He thought about Harrison Cade's 3,000 acres. He thought about Clara Whitfield's easy smile and the fact that he had not once considered going to supper. He thought about the line he had always held. And then he thought about what Adeline had said on his porch 3 weeks ago in the dark. "He cannot calculate what you are." "Yes," Ben said, "it's wreathed. Just once. Just quietly, the breath of a person who has been waiting for an answer and is only now allowing themselves to know how much they were waiting for it." "I have no fortune to offer you," he said, And it was not a deflection, it was the truest thing he knew. Said plainly, set between them like something that needed to be seen clearly before anything else could be built on top of it. I have a cabin with a patched roof and a coffee tin and a reputation that doesn't cash at any bank in Colorado. I have nothing to compete with what Cade can put on a table. Nothing that your mother is going to look at and recognize as enough. She looked at him steadily. She did not flinch. She did not look away. Your heart is enough, she said. The words landed with a quietness that was nothing like small. Ben felt them go through him, the way cold water went through a man who was thirsty, not gently, not slowly, but with the sudden complete reality of something that had been needed for a long time. Adeline, I am not asking you to compete with him, she said. I am not asking you to be something other than what you are. I am telling you what I have seen in 3 months of working beside you. And what I see is more than what he is offering me. And I know the difference. She paused. Your heart is enough. Ben, it has always been enough. You are the only one who hasn't known that. He was silent. The morning light was coming through the cabin window, and everything was very still. He looked at her, the woman who had arrived on his porch at 6 in the morning, in the wrong dress for Colorado weather, who had ruined 3 meals and blistered her palms and mapped drainage channels in the back of her ledger, and he understood, fully and without the ability to any longer pretend otherwise, that he had been in love with her for some time. He did not say that yet. Some things needed to be built before they could be named. But he stepped forward, and he took her hand, and he held it simply, plainly the way he did everything, and she looked down at their joined hands and then back up at him. And what was in her face was not relief or triumph, but something quieter and more permanent. Recognition, like something that had always been true and had simply been waiting to be said out loud. Outside, the south pasture was green with spring, and somewhere in that pasture 6 young cattle were pulling at new grass. And the well collar was holding, and the north fence was finished, and the barn wall was sound. Everything that had been broken was being made whole. One careful, honest, necessary piece at a time, and Harrison Cade was not finished. And her mother was coming in 2 weeks, and there was still so much that could go wrong. But in this moment, in this cabin, with her hand in his, and the morning coming in around them for the first time in 35 years, Benjamin Calloway did not feel like a man who had nothing. He felt like a man who had everything that mattered. And that was the most frightening and the most alive he had ever been. And that was the most frightening and the most alive he had ever been, and he held that feeling carefully, the way a man held something he was not yet sure he had the right to keep. He did not kiss her. He held her hand in the morning light of his cabin and looked at her and let what was true between them be true, without rushing it past the moment it was in. Then he let go. Not because he wanted to, because some things needed ground beneath them before they could stand, and the ground between them was still being built. And he was a man who knew better than anyone what happened to structures raised before the foundation was ready. Your mother arrives in 2 weeks, he said. Yes. Then we have 2 weeks to make sure what she sees when she gets here is something she can't argue with. Adeline looked at him for a moment, reading him, the way she read everything, with the patient intelligence that had stopped surprising him weeks ago. You're not frightened of her, she said. I'm not frightened of her, he agreed. But I respect what she means to you, and I want her to see the truth of this place. Not a performance, the truth. Something moved through Adeline's expression that he could not entirely name. Ben, she said quietly, we have work to do, he said, and picked up his hat. She watched him. Then she picked up her ledger. Yes, she said. We do. The 2 weeks before Eleanor Foster arrived were the hardest and the most productive of everything they had done. Ben pushed the pace on the south pasture and brought in Tom Greer's 2 boys for the drainage channel, real labor. Swift and accurate, the kind of work that changed what land could do. Adeline drove the documentation with a focus that was almost frightening to watch. Every expenditure itemized, every income recorded, every improvement noted with dates and measurements in the clean, steady hand she used for everything important. She wrote to her contact in Boston and confirmed the arrangement on the loan. She wrote to Sutcliffe about the possibility of adding 2 more head before summer. She reviewed her operational clause numbers 4 times and knew them from memory by the end of the first week. And in the spaces between, in the early mornings before the work began, and in the late afternoons when the light went golden and the day's tasks were done, she and Ben moved around each other with the careful, deliberate awareness of two people who had said something true and were living inside the weight of it. He did not take her hand again. She did not ask him to. But the space between them had changed. It had a different quality now. A warmth that was not accidental. A particular attention each of them gave to the other that could not be explained by fence lines and cattle counts. Walt noticed, you seem. Walt paused, with the expression of a man choosing his words carefully for once in his life. Different. Work's going well, Ben said. Walt looked at him. Right, Walt said. That must be it. Eleanor Foster arrived on a Thursday, on the afternoon stage, and she was nothing like what Ben had expected. He had built a picture in his mind, a woman like Adeline but harder, more fixed in her views, with the rigid certainty of someone who had made up their mind before boarding the train. What stepped off the stage was a woman of 56 with Adeline's blue eyes and a face that had clearly been beautiful and was now something better, intelligent, watchful, with the particular expression of someone who observed before speaking and rarely observed incorrectly. She saw Ben immediately. Not because he was standing next to Adeline, he was standing 10 feet away, deliberately, holding Clementine's reins, but because she was the kind of woman who located the most relevant person in any gathering within approximately 8 seconds, and he was, apparently, the most relevant. She looked at him for 3 full seconds before she looked at her daughter. Then she looked at Adeline, and whatever she saw there made her eyes go very quiet and very careful. Mother. Adeline stepped forward and they embraced warmly, genuinely, and also with the slight formality of two women who communicated best at a slight angle to the direct. Adeline. Eleanor pulled back and held her daughter's face between her hands for a moment. You look well. I am well. Eleanor's eyes went back to Ben. Adeline turned. Mother, this is Benjamin Calloway. He has been invaluable to the property. Ben stepped forward and removed his hat. Mrs. Foster, welcome to Colorado. Eleanor looked at him, not rudely, not warmly, but with the direct assessment of a woman who had been navigating situations like this one for 30 years and had learned to read them fast. Mr. Calloway, she said, I have heard your name several times. I hope some of it was favorable, he said. Something moved at the very corner of Eleanor's mouth. Some of it, she said. Adeline had arranged for her mother to stay at the property. The cabin was presentable now, livable, with the particulars of Adeline's careful management visible in every corner, and Ben rode out with them and then left them to the evening. Because a mother and daughter arriving at a reckoning needed privacy more than they needed a third party. He went home. He sat on his tilting porch with Rooster and his cold coffee and thought about Eleanor Foster's eyes and what they had seen when they looked at him. He had not expected to be nervous. He found that he was not afraid. Nervous, the particular state of a man who understood that the next few days would determine something larger than himself and could not be rushed or forced or managed. He could only be what he was. That had always been his only strategy. He had to hope it was enough. Eleanor asked to see the property the next morning. Not a tour. Ben understood the difference. She did not want to be shown the property. She wanted to see it, which meant she wanted to walk it herself and form her own judgments without someone pointing at things. He respected that. He rode over at 7 and found them already at the south pasture fence, Adeline with her ledger, Eleanor with her hands clasped behind her back, watching the cattle. Ben tied Clementine and walked over and stood beside Adeline without speaking. Eleanor looked at the cattle for a long moment. 6 head, she said. Yes, ma'am, Ben said. Acquired 6 weeks ago. They've settled well on the spring pasture. What do they produce? Not yet, they're being grown out. Expected to sell in the fall at market weight. Sutcliffe estimates a return of, he looked at Adeline, between $40 and $55 per head at fall prices, Adeline said. Conservative estimate puts gross return at $240 against an acquisition cost of $180. Eleanor looked at her daughter. You know these numbers, I calculated them. Not Mr. Calloway, I calculated them, Adeline said again. Evenly. Ben verified the market figures. Eleanor walked toward the barn without comment, and they followed. She looked at the repaired south wall. She looked at the well. She walked the north fence line for a quarter-mile without speaking. And then she turned and looked at Ben. "Mr. Calloway," she said, "how much is my daughter paying you?" "We have a fair arrangement," he said. "That is not an answer. No, ma'am, it is not." Eleanor studied him. "She is paying you below market rate," Eleanor said. "For the work you are doing on this property, you should be earning twice what you are. And you are not asking for more." Why? Ben looked at her directly. "Because the property needed the capital more than I did." Eleanor was silent for a moment. "That is either very honorable or very foolish," she said. "Could be both," he said. Something shifted in Eleanor's expression just slightly. Just enough. She looked at her daughter. Adeline was watching her mother with the expression of someone who has laid all their cards on the table and is waiting for the game to proceed. Eleanor looked back at the property, the whole of it. What it had been, and what it was becoming, written clearly if you knew how to read it. "Show me the ledger," she said. Adeline showed her. All of it. Not a summary, not a curated version, the actual ledger. From the first entry, every expenditure, and every income, and every projection, and every note in the margin. Eleanor sat at the cabin table and read for 40 minutes without speaking. Ben stood outside with Rooster and watched the south pasture and let the women have the room. He heard their voices through the window, not words, just cadence, and he could read the rhythm of it the way he read weather. The first 20 minutes were tense. The second 20 minutes were different. At the 40-minute mark it was quiet. Then Adeline's voice, clear and steady. Then Eleanor's voice answering. Ben did not move toward the window. He was not that kind of man. Whatever was being decided inside that cabin was going to be decided by the two women at that table, and he would know the outcome when one of them told him. He waited. Rooster leaned against his leg. He put his hand on the dog's head. After 50 minutes, the cabin door opened. Eleanor came out first. She walked to where Ben was standing and looked at him with those clear, assessing eyes, and he met them without looking away. "She is not going to sell," Eleanor said. "No, ma'am." "Because of the property." "Because of the property," he agreed. Eleanor looked at him. "Only the property?" she asked. Ben said nothing for a moment. "Mrs. Foster," he said, "I have one cabin, 4 horses, and a coffee tin with $23 in it. I am aware of what that is. Are you aware of what my daughter is?" "Yes," he said. "I am." Eleanor looked at him for a long time. "She has never in her life," Eleanor said quietly, "done a thing she was not certain of. Not once. She is the most careful person I know." A pause. "She is certain of this." He did not trust himself to speak. "I am not certain of you yet," Eleanor continued. "I want to be honest about that. I am a practical woman, and I see a great deal of goodness in what you have done here. I also see a woman who is 28 years old, choosing a life that is very different from the one she was raised for." Her voice was not unkind. "I will not stand in her way. But I am watching. I would expect nothing less," Ben said. Eleanor looked at him one more moment. Then she went back inside. Ben Exel licked his hand. "Good dog," Ben said quietly. And meant it in more ways than one. Cade moved on a Saturday. Ben heard about it from 3 different people before noon, which was how he knew it was bad. Walt came first. With the look of a man carrying news he wished he wasn't carrying. "Cade's been to see Patterson again," Walt said. "In Denver." "Yesterday." Ben set down his tools. "Patterson told me he wasn't selling the note." "He wasn't," Walt said carefully. "Until yesterday. Word is Cade came with a new angle. Not an offer to buy the note, an offer to pay it off outright. Full amount immediately on behalf of a third party." Ben went very still. "What third party?" Walt looked uncomfortable. "Someone named Alderman. James Alderman. Eleanor Foster's cousin." The pieces fell together with a sound like something breaking. Eleanor Foster's cousin, who would have received a letter from Harrison Cade, who had covered Eleanor's travel costs, who had been corresponding with Adeline's mother before she arrived, who had just apparently arranged to retire Gerald Foster's land note on behalf of the family, which meant the note no longer belonged to Patterson, which meant the operational clause no longer applied to a neutral third party, which meant Cade had found a way around everything they had done in Denver, through the one person Ben had not thought to account for. Ben rode to the Foster property in 12 minutes, which was faster than he had ever ridden it. Adeline already knew. She was at the table with the ledger open and Eleanor sitting across from her. And the atmosphere in that cabin was the particular quality of a room in which two people have just had a very fast and very significant conversation. Ben came in without knocking the first time he had ever done so, and both women looked at him. "James Alderman," he said. Adeline nodded once. "How long has Cade been in contact with him?" "I don't know," Eleanor said. And her voice had a quality Ben had not heard in it before, something that was close to shame. "James wrote to me 6 weeks ago asking about Adeline's situation. I told him about the property, about the note. She stopped. I did not know he had a relationship with Cade." Adeline was looking at her ledger. "The note retirement means the operational clause is now held by a family member," she said. And her voice was very controlled. "James can enforce or waive it at his discretion. And if Cade has influenced James, he can trigger the clause," Ben said. "Even if you're meeting the terms." On the argument that the terms are not being met adequately. She looked up. "Which Cade would be very willing to provide documentation for." Eleanor's face had gone through several things while they spoke and arrived at something that was clearly not comfortable. "I will write to James tonight," she said. "Mother, I brought this into your house," Eleanor said. And her voice was very quiet and very direct. "I am going to take it out." Adeline looked at her mother. Ben looked at Adeline. "There's something else we can do," he said. Both women looked at him. "The clause requires demonstrated management failure," he said. Not just Alderman saying there is one actual demonstrated failure. Which means, if the property's production numbers are strong enough, public enough, documented through enough third parties, that any legal challenge would require disproving testimony from multiple independent sources. He paused. They can't trigger the clause without a hearing, and a hearing means a judge. And a judge in Colorado territory sees a woman who has documented every cent of a working operation for 6 months against a land speculator trying to acquire a property he can't buy fairly. Adeline was watching him. "You are describing making the record so clean it's bulletproof," she said. "I'm describing making the record what it already is," he said. "We just need the right people to see it." "Who?" "Martin Cole for the legal documentation. Sutcliffe for independent testimony on the stock, Mrs. Harmon, Tom Greer, people who have seen this property change and can say so under oath if it comes to it." He looked at her steadily. "And I will sign a statement of my own work here. Hours, materials, costs, dates, everything I've done and what it's produced." Adeline was very still. "If you sign a statement," she said carefully, "you put yourself in the middle of a legal dispute with a man who has 3,000 acres and considerably more patience than is comfortable. I know that. Ben, I know that." "Adeline." His voice was quiet and firm. "I have been in the middle of this since the first morning you came to my door. Signing a piece of paper doesn't change what's already true." She looked at him. Eleanor was watching them with the expression of a woman who had arrived certain of something and was in the process of becoming certain of something else. "All right," Adeline said. "I'll go to Martin Cole this afternoon. I'm coming with you." "Yes," he said. "You are." Martin Cole read Ben's statement twice. Asked 4 questions, made 2 corrections to the legal language, and signed as witness without hesitation. "This is solid," Martin said. "If it comes to a hearing, this is a strong foundation." "Will it come to a hearing?" Adeline asked. Martin looked at her over his reading glasses. "Depends on how committed Cade is." He set the papers down. "A man like him calculates. If the cost of pushing this through a hearing exceeds the value of the land at any realistic projection, he paused, "but Cade doesn't like to lose. That's not a calculation, that's character. And character doesn't always listen to math." Ben thought about the morning Cade had come to his cabin. "You are a stubborn man." "Yes, sir, I am. He'll push," Ben said. Martin nodded. "Then we make sure everything is in order before he does." Martin looked at Adeline. "Mrs. Harmon, Sutcliffe, the Greer boys, can you get statements from all of them?" "By the end of the week," Ben said. "Good." Martin stacked the papers. "I'll draft a formal property status notice and file it with the county recorder. Public record. That limits what aldermen can claim without contradicting a filed document." He looked at them both. "I want to say something plainly, so there's no misunderstanding." They waited. "Cade is not doing anything illegal," Martin said. "Acquiring a note through a third party is a legal transaction. Pressuring a note holder to enforce a clause is legal. What he is doing is aggressive and calculated and aimed at taking something from someone who does not deserve to lose it, but none of that is against the law. He looked at Adeline. The law cannot protect you from a determined man with resources. What can protect you is a record so clean and so public that challenging it becomes a losing proposition. Then that's what we build, Adeline said. Martin looked at her for a moment. Your father would have liked you, he said. He was a stubborn man, too. Something moved across Adeline's face that was very brief and very real. Thank you, she said quietly. They gathered the statements in 4 days. Martha Harmon came herself, sat in Martin's office, and gave a 14-minute account of every improvement she had observed on the Foster property since April, delivered with the authority of a woman who had been watching land in Colorado Territory for 22 years and knew what she was talking about. Sutcliffe provided a written assessment of the stock condition, weight progression, estimated fall value, that was detailed enough to function as an expert witness statement if required. Tom Greer's boys gave a joint account of the drainage work that was simple and precise and entirely devastating to any claim of management failure. Ben's statement went in last. He had written it himself, not Martin's language. His own, and when Martin read it, the attorney was quiet for a moment before he said, I'm not changing a word of this. Ben looked at what he had written. It was not eloquent. It was a plain, detailed, chronological account of 5 months of work on 40 acres of Colorado Territory land, what had been broken, what had been done, what it had cost, what it had produced. At the end, in the same plain language, he had written, This property is viable. It is managed with intelligence and commitment. I have witnessed both. I do not say this because I have any interest in the outcome of this dispute beyond the truth of it. I say it because it is the truth, and I do not know how to say things any other way. Martin filed everything with the county recorder on a Friday afternoon. By Saturday morning, word was through Millhaven. By Saturday afternoon, Cade knew. He came to the property that evening. Not to Adeline, to Ben. Ben was at the barn, the repaired barn, the one with the sound south wall, when Cade's buggy came up the road. And he came out and stood in the open and waited. Cade climbed down alone. He walked up to Ben and stopped at a distance that was close enough to be direct and far enough to be civil. And he looked at Ben with an expression that was not anger. It was something cooler and more careful than anger. You filed those statements, Cade said. I did. You understand that a filed statement is a public document. That was the point, Ben said. Cade was quiet for a moment. You have made this considerably more complicated, he said. I expect I have, for yourself as well, Cade said. And his voice was very measured. I want to be clear about that. What you have done today puts you in opposition to a man with significantly more resources than you have. I am not threatening you. I am describing a reality that you should be aware of. Ben looked at him. Mr. Cade, he said, I grew up in a family that lost everything in a single winter. I have had nothing my entire life in the way that you measure things. I have no land, no capital, no note at any bank in Colorado. He kept his voice entirely even. The worst you can do to me is leave me exactly where I started. That is not a threat I find particularly threatening. Cade looked at him for a long moment. Something moved in the older man's face, not admiration. Exactly, but something adjacent. She will not sell, Cade said. No, even if Alderman enforces the clause. She'll fight it, Ben said. In front of a county judge with 5 independent statements, a perfect ledger and 6 head of documented cattle on spring grass. And she'll win, he paused. I think you know that. I think you've run the calculation. Cade was quiet. Why, he asked, and for the first time there was something genuine in the question, not strategic, not positioning. Just a man who genuinely could not understand something. Why do all of this for a piece of land that isn't yours? For a woman who was a stranger 4 months ago. Ben looked at him. He thought about all the true answers to that question. He chose the simplest one. Because she asked, he said. And because it was right. Cade looked at him for a long time. Then he turned and walked back to his buggy. He climbed in. He picked up the reins. He looked back at Ben once, just once, with an expression that Ben could not entirely read, and then he drove back down the road. Ben watched him go. He stood in the evening air for a long time afterward, listening to the sound of the property settling into dark around him, the cattle moving in the south pasture, The barn wall that held, the well that was working. He thought Cade was done. He thought it was over. He was wrong. The letter arrived 3 days later, addressed to Adeline at the property, with a Denver postmark and a seal Ben did not recognize. She brought it to him unopened, which told him everything about where they stood with each other now. He looked at the seal. "Open it," he said. She broke the seal and read it. He watched her face. She read it twice. Then she set it on the table between them. He read it. It was from a Denver attorney, acting on behalf of James Alderman. And it stated that in accordance with the terms of the land note on the Foster property, the operational clause was being formally invoked on the grounds that the current management arrangement, specifically the involvement of an uncompensated third party whose interest in the property was undisclosed, constituted an irregular management structure inconsistent with the terms of independent operation required by the clause. Ben read it again. He was the uncompensated third party. Cade had not challenged the production numbers. He had challenged Ben. He had found the one thing that was not in the filed statements, the one thing that Martin Cole had not thought to address, because it was not a legal arrangement. It was a personal one, and he had used it. He had made Ben's presence the problem. If Ben stepped back formally, completely, removed himself from the property and the management and the documentation, the clause challenge collapsed. If Ben stayed, Alderman could argue that the management was not independent. It was not about the land anymore. It was about whether Ben would leave. Adeline was very still across the table. "He found it," she said quietly. "Yes, he is saying that your involvement is the irregularity." "Yes." She looked at the letter. She looked at her ledger. She looked at Ben. "If you stepped back," she said carefully, "the challenge fails." "Yes. If you stayed, if we fought it, it goes to a hearing. Martin would need to establish that your involvement is not an undisclosed interest." She stopped. "Which would require establishing exactly what your interest is." The room was very quiet. Ben looked at the letter. He thought about what it would cost her a hearing. The legal fees against an operational fund that was already stretched. The time and the uncertainty and the risk of a judge who might see it Cade's way. He thought about stepping back. He thought about what it would mean. He thought about Adeline's hand in his in the cabin doorway. He thought about her voice saying, "Your heart is enough." He thought about 35 years of being a man who did the right thing, even when the right thing cost him. And for the first time in his life, he wondered if doing the right thing for someone you loved was not the same as doing the right thing for yourself. He looked up. "I'm not stepping back," he said. She met his eyes. "Ben, I'm not stepping back," he said again. "Not because of stubbornness. Because stepping back is what he wants. Because the moment I step back, he has established that my presence here was an irregularity which sets a precedent he can use again. Differently later." He leaned forward, "And because I do not want to step back. Not from this, not from you," he stopped. "You should know that. You deserve to know that plainly." Adeline was very still. "You are saying that your interest in this property," she said carefully, "is personal." "I am saying that my interest in you is personal," he said. "The property is where you happen to be," she breathed. "Just once. Then we fight it," she said. "We fight it, together." "Together," he said. She looked at the letter one more time. Then she closed it inside her ledger, the same ledger she had carried through 5 months of Colorado territory. The same one that held every number and every channel and every note in the margin of a life she was building from scratch. She closed it and looked at him. "I did not choose a fortune," she said quietly. "I chose the man who built something from nothing. And I am not going to let Harrison Cade make me pretend otherwise." Ben looked at her. Outside, the south pasture was quiet. The cattle were settled. The barn wall was sound. The north fence was done. Everything they had built together was standing, and they were going to stand in front of a judge in Colorado territory and say so. Plainly, without apology, the way they said everything with honesty and with each other. The hearing was set for 3 weeks out, and Harrison Cade was not finished. But then again, neither were they. But then again, neither were they, and the 3 weeks before the hearing were the longest of Ben Calloway's life. Not because he was afraid of the outcome, because he was afraid of what the outcome would cost her if it went wrong. And he could not protect her from that, and protecting people from things he could not control was the particular kind of helplessnesses he had never learned to carry gracefully. He went to the property every morning. He worked. He did not speak about the hearing unless Adeline brought it up. And she brought it up sparingly, not because she was avoiding it, but because she was the kind of person who prepared in silence and spoke when the preparation was done. Eleanor was still there. That surprised Ben more than anything else in those 3 weeks. He had expected Adeline's mother to leave to return to Boston once the situation clarified itself into something either resolved or irretrievably lost. But Eleanor Foster stayed. And she did not stay passively. She wrote to James Alderman herself. Ben found out from Adeline, who found out when the letter came back unopened. Eleanor received the returned letter at the breakfast table and looked at it for a long moment and then set it aside and picked up her coffee and said, in a voice that was entirely steady, James has made his position clear. Mother, I am not upset, Eleanor said. I am clarified. She set the coffee down. He has chosen his side. That tells me everything I need to know about the quality of his judgment and the value of his opinion going forward. She looked at her daughter. When is the hearing? Tuesday, Adeline said. I will be there, Eleanor said. That was all she said about it. But the following morning, she came to find Ben at the north fence. She came to him directly. Alone, without Adeline, and she stood beside him in the morning air and watched him work for a full minute before she spoke. You should know something, she said. Ben set down his tools and turned. I was wrong about you, Eleanor said, and she said it without preamble and without the softening that people usually wrapped around admissions of that kind. I arrived here with a judgment already formed. I had Harrison Cade's version of events and my own assumptions, and I did not question either of them adequately. She met his eyes. My daughter is 28 years old and has never once in her life made a decision she was not certain of. She is certain of you. I have watched you for 2 weeks and I understand why. A pause. I am not wrong about things often. When I am, I say so. Ben looked at her. Thank you, he said. Eleanor looked at the fence line. Fix the post, she said. It's leaning 3 degrees east. He looked at the post. She was right. Yes, ma'am, he said, and picked up his tools. Eleanor walked back to the property without another word, and Ben watched her go and thought that Adeline's precision and her stubbornness and her way of saying exactly what she meant and no more had come from somewhere very specific, and he was grateful for it. Martin Cole came to see Ben on the Friday before the hearing. He sat across the table in Ben's cabin with his hands folded and the expression of a man who had something to say that he was going to say carefully. I need to know something before Tuesday, Martin said. Ben waited. The challenge to your involvement rests on the claim that you are an undisclosed interested party. Martin looked at him directly. I can argue that your interest is that of a neighbor and a hired hand. That is the legal argument, and it is defensible. He paused. It is also incomplete. Ben said nothing. A judge who is paying attention, Martin continued, is going to look at 5 months of unpaid or undercompensated work on a property belonging to a single woman, accompanied by documented personal advocacy on her behalf, and he is going to draw a conclusion that the legal argument does not address. Martin leaned forward slightly. If the judge asks me directly whether your interest in Miss Foster's property is purely professional, I am going to need to give him an answer that is true, which means I need to know what the true answer is. The cabin was quiet. Ben looked at the table. He thought about all the ways he had been careful, all the ways he had held back, all the mornings he had ridden to the property and done the work and ridden home, and not said the thing that was growing more obvious and more unavoidable with every passing day. My interest in the property is professional, Ben said slowly. My interest in Adeline Foster is personal. Those are 2 separate things, and I have kept them separate. Martin studied him. You have kept them separate, Martin repeated. Yes. Does she know they are separate? Ben looked up. Martin waited. No, Ben said. She knows both things. She doesn't know I've been keeping them separate. Martin was quiet for a moment. Ben, he said, with the care of a man who liked him and was about to say something uncomfortable, if you go into that hearing with an incomplete truth and the judge finds the gap, it looks worse than the complete truth told directly. He folded his papers. I am not telling you what to do with your personal life. I am telling you that incomplete truths in a legal proceeding are not the same as private matters. A pause. Whatever is true between you and Miss Foster, if it has a name, it should have that name before Tuesday morning. Ben sat with that for a long time after Martin left. He sat with it through the evening. He sat with it until the coffee went cold and Rooster was asleep at his feet and the cabin was entirely dark except for the lamp on the table. Then he put on his hat and went out. He rode to the property at 9 o'clock at night, which was not something he had ever done, and he knocked on the cabin door, which was something he had only done once before. Eleanor opened it. She looked at him. She looked at the expression on his face. She stepped back and held the door open. "She is in the back," Eleanor said. He went through. Adeline was at the small desk at the back of the cabin, the one she had set up for evening work, with her ledger open and the lamp turned up and her hair loose around her shoulders in the way it was when she was working late and had stopped thinking about appearances. She turned when she heard him. Ben. She stood immediately. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong," he said. "I need to say something." She went very still. He crossed the room and stood in front of her and took a breath that was not entirely steady, which was new. Ben Calloway had stood steady in blizzards and in front of men with considerably more cause for concern than this moment. And this moment was where his steadiness finally entirely failed him. "I told Martin today that my interest in this property is professional and my interest in you is personal," he said, "and that I have kept those two things separate." She was watching him with those direct blue eyes. "He told me that incomplete truths cause problems," Ben continued. "And he is right. So I am going to stop being incomplete about this." He looked at her, really looked, the way he had been not letting himself look for months. "I am in love with you. I have been for some time. I do not know exactly when it started, because I was trying not to let it start. But it started anyway, the way things do when they are true, and you cannot stop them from being true no matter how careful you are." He stopped. "I have nothing to offer you that is measurable. I have told you that. You told me it was enough. I am standing here to tell you that I believe you. That I am choosing to believe you. Because the alternative is to keep being a man who is so afraid of what he doesn't have that he never reaches for what he does." The room was very quiet. Adeline looked at him. Her eyes were very bright. "Benjamin Calloway," she said. And her voice was not entirely steady either, which was the most beautiful thing he had ever heard. "You have been the most careful, most stubborn, most honorable man I have ever known. And you have made me wait an unreasonably long time for exactly what you just said." Something broke open in his chest that had been held shut for a very long time. He reached out. She came to him not tentatively, not with the composed deliberateness she used for everything, but directly, the way she moved when she had already decided, and he held her with both arms, and she put her face against his shoulder, and for a long moment neither of them moved. He felt her breathe. He felt her relax in the particular way of someone who has been holding something taut for months and has finally been told they can put it down. "I love you," she said quiet, against his shoulder. "I have been extremely patient about it." He made a sound that was more laughter than he had produced in recent memory. "You have been patient," he agreed. She pulled back just enough to look at him. He looked at her, and then he kissed her, because it was the only honest thing left to do, and he was a man who dealt in honesty. And she kissed him back with the same directness she brought to everything. And the lamp burned on the desk, and the ledger set open to a page of numbers that suddenly seemed, for the first time, entirely secondary. Eleanor Foster, in the front room, said nothing, but Ben heard distinctly the sound of a chair being moved and a cup being set down with a particular kind of quiet satisfaction. The hearing was held on Tuesday morning in the county courthouse, in a room that smelled of wood polish and old paper and the particular gravity of decisions being made. Judge Harlan Prescott was 63 years old, born in Tennessee, and had been making decisions in Colorado Territory for 11 years, with the reputation of a man who did not waste time and did not suffer arguments that mistook volume for substance. He looked at Cade's attorney. He looked at Martin Cole. He looked at the filed statements, the ledger, the complete ledger, presented as evidence, and the formal property status notice. He looked at Adeline. He looked at Ben. He looked back at the papers. "I am going to ask a direct question," Prescott said. And the room went very still. "Mr. Calloway, your interest in Miss Foster's property, state it plainly." Ben stood. My interest in the property is that of a man who has done paid and unpaid work on it for 6 months, he said. The work is documented. The terms are documented. There is no undisclosed financial arrangement. He paused. My interest in Miss Foster herself is personal. I intend to ask her to marry me. If she'll have me. That is a separate matter from the property. And I have kept it separate. The room was very quiet. Adeline, seated beside Martin Cole at the respondent's table, did not look at Ben. She looked at the judge. Her face was entirely composed. But Ben could see, from where he was standing, that her hands were clasped together on the table with the particular tightness of someone who is keeping themselves very still by very deliberate effort. Prescott looked at Cade's attorney. "Does your client wish to argue?" Prescott said, with a dryness that suggested he was going to enjoy this. That a man who intends to propose marriage to the property holder constitutes an irregularity in her independent management. Cade's attorney began to speak. Prescott held up one hand. "Let me rephrase," Prescott said. "Is there a single document in your filing that demonstrates any undisclosed financial interest on Mr. Calloway's part? Not emotional, not personal, financial." A silence that lasted long enough to answer the question before the attorney spoke. "The challenge rests on the irregular management structure." "I heard the challenge," Prescott said. "I am asking about financial interest. Yes or no?" "No," the attorney said. "Not financial." Prescott looked at the filed statements. He looked at the ledger. He looked at the status notice. He folded his hands. "The operational clause challenge is dismissed," he said. "The documentation of this property's management is thorough, consistent, and entirely adequate to the terms of the note. There is no irregularity that this court can recognize as substantive." He looked at Cade's attorney with an expression that was not warm. "I want to say something for the record, and I want it recorded." He looked at the papers in front of him. "This court has seen a great number of challenges brought against small property holders by parties with substantially greater resources. Some of them have merit. Some of them are exercises in leverage." He set the papers down. "I find no merit in this one. The challenge is dismissed in its entirety. Miss Foster's right to her property is clear and uncontested by anything this court has seen today." He looked at her directly. "You have built something worth keeping." He stood. The room stood. The gavel came down. Cade was in the corridor when they came out. He was standing alone, not with his attorney, not with any of the people who usually surrounded him, and he looked like a man who had run his calculation one final time and found that the answer had changed. He looked at Adeline. She looked at him. "Congratulations, Miss Foster," he said, and his voice was very measured and very careful. "You have a good property, I know," she said. Something moved in his face. Respect. Possibly, or the closest thing to it that a man like Cade could produce for a situation he had not won. He looked at Ben, met his gaze. "Calloway," Cade said. "Mr. Cade," Ben said. Cade looked between them one more time. Then he put on his hat and walked out of the courthouse, and the sound of his boots on the stone floor faded and was gone. Eleanor, standing to Adeline's left, exhaled slowly. "Well," she said, "that is that." Martin Cole shook Ben's hand, and then Adeline, and said something about the filing that Ben did not entirely hear, because the blood was still moving fast in his ears, and the morning was very bright through the courthouse windows, and Adeline was standing 2 feet from him, with her ledger under her arm and her chin up. She turned and looked at him. "You told the judge you intended to propose," she said, and her voice was very precise and very quiet. "I did," he said. "In front of a room full of people. It seemed relevant." She looked at him. "Benjamin Calloway," she said, "if you think that counts as a proposal, you are going to have to try considerably harder than that." Martin Cole suddenly found something very interesting to look at in his papers. Eleanor turned toward the courthouse door, with the expression of a woman who had somewhere else to be. Ben looked at Adeline. He thought about his cabin. He thought about his coffee tin, which now held $47, which was still not a fortune by any measure that Harrison Cade would recognize. He thought about a tilting porch and a patched roof, and 4 horses, and a border collie named Rooster, and the particular way she said his name when she meant it. He went down on one knee on the stone floor of the Millhaven County Courthouse. Adeline's breath caught, just once. "I have no fortune to offer you," he said. "You know that." I have told you that honestly since the beginning, and it has not changed. I have a cabin with a patched roof and a coffee tin and a reputation that won't cash at any bank in Colorado. He looked up at her. I have $47, 4 horses, and a dog who likes you more than he likes me. I have the knowledge of this land and the willingness to work it as long as I am able. I have a heart that has belonged to you since a morning in April when you mapped a drainage channel in a ledger before breakfast and told me I had nothing to be ashamed of. He paused. I cannot promise you a fortune. I can promise you honesty. Every day, without exception. I can promise you that I will show up. I can promise you that I will not leave when things are hard. Because I have never left anything I believed in, and I believe in you more than I have ever believed in anything. He took a breath. Adeline Foster, will you marry a man with a patched roof and a tilting porch and not nearly enough money? Who loves you more than he has ever known how to say? Adeline was looking at him. Her eyes were very bright. Her composure was entirely gone. And what was underneath it was something unguarded and real and more beautiful than anything he had seen in 35 years. Yes, she said, obviously yes. She reached down and took his face in both hands, the gesture of a woman who had decided and was not going to be composed about it, and he stood and she kissed him right there in the county courthouse corridor and Martin Cole's. Papers became extremely interesting, and Eleanor Foster, halfway through the courthouse door, stopped and turned back and looked at the two of them, and her face did something that was not complicated at all. It was simply love, the kind a mother feels when she watches her daughter choose correctly. The months that followed were not a fairy tale. They were something better. They were real. The South pasture produced. The cattle went to market in October at prices that exceeded Sutcliffe's conservative estimate by $11 a head. And Adeline recorded every cent in the ledger with the satisfaction of a woman who had calculated correctly and knew it. James Alderman sent a letter in September that was formal and awkward and constituted, in its careful language, an apology that he did not have quite enough honesty to call an apology directly. Eleanor went back to Boston in August, and at the stage she held her daughter for a long moment, and then turned to Ben and looked at him with those clear, assessing eyes, and said, "You will write to me if she needs anything." "She won't need anything," Ben said. "But I'll write to you anyway." Eleanor looked at him for a moment. "Good," she said. She got on the stage. She did not look back, because she was not that kind of woman. But Adeline watched the stage until it was out of sight, and Ben stood beside her and said nothing, because she did not need words from him in that moment. She needed him present, which was different, and he had learned the difference. They married in October, 3 days after the cattle went to market. Not a large ceremony. Martha Harmon and Tom Greer and his wife and the Sutcliffes and Walt Pruitt, who cried in the way of a man who was genuinely happy and was not going to pretend otherwise. Martin Cole stood witness. The reverend from the church in town performed the ceremony in the Foster property cabin, which was clean and warm and had curtains that Adeline had sewn herself with a precision that suggested she had approached curtain making the same way she approached everything, with a plan and the willingness to restart until it was right. Ben wore his best shirt and his cleaned boots. Adeline wore a dress that was not the Blue City dress from Boston. It was something she had made in Colorado, in a dark cream wool, with her own hands, which was not something she had known how to do when she arrived in April, and was something she knew now. When the Reverend asked if he took her, Ben said yes without hesitation. When the Reverend asked if she took him, Adeline said yes with the directness she used for everything that mattered to her. And when it was done, and the Reverend said whatever reverends said at the end of things like that, Ben looked at her, his wife, the most careful and stubborn and honest person he had ever known, and she looked at him. And neither of them said anything, because everything that needed saying had already been said on a tilting porch in the dark and in a courthouse corridor on a Tuesday morning and on 40 acres of Colorado territory that had been broken and was being made whole. That evening, when the guests had gone, and the cabin was quiet, and the south pasture was dark and settled, and the cattle were where they ought to be, Adeline sat at the desk and opened her ledger. Ben was in the chair by the fire with Rooster at his feet. And he watched her. "Working?" he asked. "Reviewing," she said. "There is a difference. What are you reviewing?" She was quiet for a moment. "The first entry," she said, "March, before I arrived." The assessment from Denver. She ran her finger down the page. $600. That is what they said it was worth. What's it worth now? She looked at the numbers she had entered that morning after the cattle sale. Considerably more, she said. He smiled. She closed the ledger. She turned in the chair and looked at him across the room, across the firelight, across the cabin, across the distance that was no longer distance at all, and what was in her face was the same thing that had been growing there since April. Since the drainage map and the fence post that decided to become part of the earth and the cold coffee on the tilting porch. It was not gratitude, it was not relief. It was something that had no entry in a ledger and no column for calculation. Ben, she said, Adeline. My mother was right about one thing, she said quietly. What's that? She always said that a house is only worth what is inside it. She looked at him steadily. I thought she meant furniture. He looked at her. She meant this, Adeline said. She meant what cannot be bought or sold or noted against a land value in a Denver office. Her voice was very quiet and very certain. She meant what you brought to this place. Ben looked at the fire. He thought about Wyoming in the winter of '79, when everything his family had built turned to nothing in 3 months of cold. He thought about 17 years of moving through a world that measured him in what he didn't have. He thought about a morning in April when a woman arrived on his tilting porch in the wrong dress, and a year that had changed him in ways he was still learning the shape of. He looked back at her. A fortune can buy a house, he said. But it takes a good heart to make it a home. She looked at him. Where did you hear that? Nowhere, he said. I just know it's true. She looked at him for a long moment, with the direct and patient attention she gave to things she was in the process of understanding. Then she got up from the desk and crossed the room and sat down beside him by the fire, not in another chair, but sat beside him close, the way they had stopped needing the distance, and he put his arm around her, and she leaned into him, and sat together in the quiet of the cabin while the fire burned and the south pasture held and the north fence stood and the well ran clean. Outside, the Colorado Territory night came in wide and clear, full of stars that did not care who owned what or how many acres or what a man's coffee tin held. Ben Calloway held his wife and looked at the fire. He thought about everything he had. He was not going to count it. There was no number that would have done it justice. There was only this, the warmth, the quiet, the woman beside him who had said your heart is enough and had meant it so completely that he had finally, after 35 years, believed it. He had not married the richest man in Colorado. She had not married the richest man in the West. She had married the man who stayed. And in the end, in the only accounting that had ever actually mattered, that was the only fortune either of them had ever needed. Some things could not be bought. Some things could not be measured. Some things could only be built by hand, by choice, by showing up day after day for something and someone worth the showing up for. Ben Calloway had always known that. He just hadn't known, until this year, that it was enough to make a whole life from. Now he did, and he was never going to forget it.